Welcome to Troubleshooting Innovation, a commercial baking podcast, sponsored by Lalamun Baking, a fermentation-based ingredient supplier committed to reinforcing the goodness of grain. I'm your host, Joanie Spencer, Editor-in-Chief of Commercial Baking. This season, I'm speaking with Julie Miller-Jones, a member of the Grain Foods Foundation Scientific Advisory Board, and Charlotte Martin, registered dietitian and consultant for the Grain Foods Foundation. And we are debunking bread myths to help bakers develop delicious, healthy, grain-based products and help them educate their consumers on the health benefits of bread. In this episode, we discover how commercial bread bakers can bust through bread myths through sandwich innovation. Hi, Julie and Charlotte. Thanks so much for joining me again this week.
Nice to be with you.
Thanks for having us again.
So I was in my 20s in the 90s, and I was a product of the show Friends. And so when I think about sandwich innovation, I think about Joey Tribbiani. So I'm going to just call this the Joey Tribbiani episode. And I also love sandwiches. So I am just so excited to have this conversation with you guys about how sandwiches can be sort of the game changer for breaking through consumer misconceptions. So over the past 3 weeks, we've really unpacked a lot of these misconceptions about bread. And I think we've learned that a lot of times it's important to consider bread's role in larger meal items like sandwiches. So I just want to kick this conversation off by asking why it's important to consider what's between the slices when thinking about some of these factors that we've talked about so far, like sodium and sugar and things like that.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So when it comes to the nutritional aspect, it's definitely true that some sandwiches can be a lot less healthy due to things like high sodium processed meats and then, excessive condiments and spreads. And so this can certainly lead to a sandwich being very high in sodium and added sugar. I had mentioned this in a previous episode, but for example, a 2-ounce serving of sliced like deli honey ham can have 500 to 600 milligrams of sodium for just 2 ounces. And rarely are people sticking to just 2 ounces. So that sodium can really, really add up. But on the flip side, you can make a highly nutritious sandwich. And that would just be, by featuring things like lean proteins, like cooked chicken breast. You can add a lot of fiber-rich vegetables and healthy fats as spreads like avocado or hummus instead of, packing on the mayo. And then really just opting for home-prepared sandwiches when you can really puts you in control. So you get to control the bread, the serving size, and then what and how much goes between those slices.
Charlotte, do you ever steer people toward certain types of bread when they're building sandwiches?
Generally, I do. I tend to steer them towards whole grain breads for the most part, but I make it clear that both types, so enriched and whole grains, can be and should be, if they want, should be part of a balanced diet, but provided that they try to stick with whole grains for the most part.
Right. So, Julie, I want to sort of tap into your food science perspective on this. What would you say is the key to pairing the right bread for a sandwich in terms of, again, thinking from the food science side, how does it hold up to the filling of a sandwich while also providing benefits for health?
Well, I think it depends on when you're going to eat the sandwich. If you're talking about packing one in a lunch, you might want to think about not so much the kind of bread, but using something like a fat-based barrier. Think about fat as you want the fat to deliver nutrients too. Things like peanut butter, things like hummus, they'll have fiber and they'll have protein, and they also can prevent the bread from getting soggy. Another strategy is just to have a separate bag or wax paper for the really juicy things like tomatoes, so that they aren't sitting there all day till you get to lunch and soaking the bread. It is true that denser breads or breads with more fat, like croissants, may be better, but I have trouble recommending those on a regular basis because so many more calories and higher in fat in the case of the croissant. The dietary guidelines says to make half your grains whole. So one way to do that, if you really like white bread, make one white and one whole grain. So you have it sort of looks attractive and fun and different, and you have half your grains whole. So
Oh, that's a great idea. I'm seeing a lot of brands selling half loaves. So then it gives consumers an opportunity to mix and match with their sandwiches. I like that.
you can also then, if you buy the whole loaf, you can divide it yourself so that you have, I'm a 2-person family. So we take part of the loaf and freeze it. Usually you divide it in about thirds. And that way the bread is always fresh when you need it, because freezing is so much better than refrigerating, because refrigerating stales the bread, as you know, and freezing doesn't. And so you want the bread at room temperature or frozen. You don't want it in that middling ground, which does prevent mold, but promotes staling. And so it gives you a tougher crumb.
Well, this seems like there's an opportunity here, Julie, for like messaging on packaging. I don't often see bread brands giving storage suggestions like, here's how you can extend the life of your bread, put it in the freezer, not the refrigerator.
And I realize that if you're in a small apartment, you may not have the freezer space, but it really is a way to have the nicest crumb, because what happens when you put the bread in the refrigerator, the starch molecules in the bread crumb come together, and that's what makes it tough or stale. What you want is to have a more tender crumb. Freezing stops that.
Oh, okay. We're talking about sandwiches, and I'm going to bring something up that I found to be a little bit unsettling. There is this thing out there, this rhetoric out there, and it's called the sandwich problem. The Wall Street Journal ran an article where it called sandwiches the saboteur of the American diet. That's a really blanket statement.
It's clickbait. It drives me crazy because it's clickbait. You could say soups are the most dangerous thing in the American diet. I just looked up one common company that sells soups, sandwiches, salads, coffee. The average sandwich has about 360 calories. It depends, as Charlotte said, it's how much meat do you put in it. And I call it, you should use your jaw meter. If you're really widening your jaw to get this sandwich in your mouth, you've probably got a sandwich that's got too much filling in it, creating the sandwich problem. We could say we had a pasta problem, because you can go into these restaurants. I can order a sandwich that has over 2,000 calories and 2,000 milligrams of sodium, but I can order a pasta that does the same thing or be even higher. And the question is, should we eat the amount of either of those that is being served to you? Because many times these are really ginormous. There should be shared, particularly for people like me, where I don't need many calories now. But even for the average person on the 2,000 calorie diet, you can't blow 2/3 of your calorie allotment on a single sandwich, on a single pasta, on a single anything. To just say that the sandwich is dangerous, it's what choices we make in the diet, and that's what is the saboteur of the diet. So it made a lot of buzz in the article, but it bothered me.
Yeah. And just to add to that, a blanket statement like that is problematic because, like we mentioned, sandwiches can be a very nutritious, convenient, and affordable meal option. And then on that nutritious piece, I mean, I've seen some bread options that can provide you with 6 or 7 grams of fiber and upwards of 10 grams of protein for your sandwich just from the bread alone. So if you add some lean protein and then layer in lots of vegetables, healthy fats, you could get upwards of a third, even maybe almost half of your daily fiber needs from a sandwich, and a significant chunk of protein too.
Well, I think you want to think about it. You're going to get two of your bread and cereal servings in a sandwich. The objective, I think, is to get 2 of your fruit and vegetable servings. And this can be fruit. For instance, a peanut butter with banana and raisins, or grated carrot, There are all kinds of creative ways to put vegetables into the sandwich. And that's one of the ways we fall down so badly. We don't get enough fiber. Under 5% of us eat the amount of fiber that we're supposed to. And less than a third eat the number of fruits and vegetables. That's why we aren't eating the right amount of grains, and we aren't eating the right amount of fruits and vegetables. And that's why we're in trouble. We're in trouble not because of the sandwich, but it's because of everything else we do.
Well, it seemed just a little bit shocking to me because obviously I don't think anyone in this conversation subscribes to any sort of elimination type of diet. Like it's not healthy and it's not safe unless there's like a physical response. Like if you have celiac, it's not a good idea to eliminate one particular food type from your diet. And then the thing that was a little bit alarming to me was that this is taking it a step further because sandwiches, like that's just so broad. It's extremely broad, this statement that it could be anything. We could be talking about white bread and bologna, or we could be talking about whole grains and almond butter. I mean, to make such a blanket statement, that was what was shocking. To say that, to blame sandwiches in general, was a little bit crazy to me.
I couldn't agree more. I think this blaming of one thing, as this is what's causing us to be fat, it's causing hypertension or whatever, is never going to get us to solve the problem. It just causes us to chase red herrings.
Welleman Baking is proud to sponsor this season of Troubleshooting Innovation. As a supplier to the baking industry and member of the Grain Foods Foundation, Lallemand is committed to reinforcing the goodness of grain and sharing credible sources of information to communicate the health benefits of bread. So then we have this. So on the one hand, we've got Wall Street Journal using the term sandwich problem. But on the other hand, there's research saying that roughly half of Americans eat a sandwich every day. So when you put those two together, it almost sounds like there's an opportunity here from a product development standpoint and a marketing standpoint. And with the Grain Foods Foundation participating in the Build a Better Sandwich initiative, how do you ladies see this being able to build up bread for the industry and for consumers?
Well, I think that one of the things that has been a missed opportunity in terms of education and publicity is the bread is simply not a platform in which you get the other things into your mouth. The bread, as Charlotte mentioned, has all these nutrients. But just even if we take a simple sandwich with the right amount of meat in it, what happens when you eat those two together is that the iron in the meat, the myoglobin, actually pulls the iron from the bread and makes it more available. So it actually increases the total amount of iron. It's 1 + 1 = 3. And so I think people don't know that. And I think people don't know that the protein in bread is incomplete. But if I put it with the protein in hummus, which is also incomplete, I now have a complete protein from two inexpensive plant sources. I think those are the kinds of messages that the bread industry can use and maybe want to partner with the legume industry or the hummus people to actually show how this actually helps in a sustainable plant-forward diet that is portable, doesn't in many cases require refrigeration. That's why it's so popular to carry within you in a lunch. So there's just many kinds of opportunities to do that.
Yeah. And incorporating sandwiches into a healthy lifestyle can be pretty straightforward and enjoyable. I mean, we've talked about the fillings quite a bit now, but also consider portion sizes. So a sandwich can be very filling and nutritious without being oversized, like we're so used to right now. And one way to control the size is, of course, to make it yourself. And then also how you balance your sandwich containing meal. So balancing it with a side of fruits or vegetables rather than what we traditionally serve sandwiches with, like high calorie chips or fries. But I think following some of these easy guidelines, you can make sandwiches a delicious and very healthy part of any diet.
And you can also even appeal to the high end. For instance, crostini or bruschetta are open-faced sandwiches that bring vegetables, they're interesting, they're fun. As an alternative to a chip and a fat-laden dip, this might be a terrific answer. And so just to think about it in a different way.
Yeah, and I think a lot of bakers are increasing their efforts to educate consumers about how they can use their products in a good sandwich or using their products in a good way, whether it's getting really adventurous from a culinary perspective or how they use breads in a healthy diet. This is where I've kind of seen social media being used in a positive way. Charlotte, I hope you see that as well, where bakery brands are using social media to share recipes and provide sandwich ideas for consumers. And then I even know of one bakery brand that has launched a cookbook. They're a specialty bread company and they launched a cookbook for all different sandwich ideas and recipes. So if you put that together with Build a Better Sandwich, how can this industry promote sandwich culture as a part of healthy eating?
Yeah, I mean, I think that cookbook is a great idea. I mean, from what I've noticed, just looking at different brands, Instagram pages, a lot will do, some really nice sandwich imagery, very colorful. I think that's really helpful. I also noticed some images where the sandwich is incorporated as part of a meal, with like a salad. So it's not just the sandwich. And I think that highlights that a sandwich can be part of a healthy, balanced diet. Some other things that I've seen that I think are great. One bread brand I saw kind of broke down the ingredients in one of their whole grain breads and had a nice little infographic about the different, they had, I think, a couple seeds in there and some whole grain flours that aren't normally used, and did a nice little infographic on that. And I think consumers really like to see that and learn more about the ingredients in the bread.
And to add on to that, I think to really explain to consumers, using an infographic as an example, on why these polysorbate 60 might be in your bread, which sounds like, oh my God.
And I haven't seen that, Julie, so it would be nice if they would tackle that.
Well, because it's an emulsifier.
Mm-hmm.
And what it does is it takes French bread, which lasts a day because it has 4 ingredients in it, with the various kinds of crumb softeners. Polysorbate is one of those. You can actually extend the shelf life. That makes it less expensive. It makes it more sustainable. I was upset with the bread manufacturers a while back because one of the bloggers wrote that this particular compound was the same compound that was in yoga mats. You may remember that incident.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And so bread makers rushed to take it out. And I just thought that was the absolute wrong strategy. It said to the consumer, we've been putting this in, we've been not telling you about it, and now we know it's bad and we're taking it out. Instead of saying, it's here and this is the reason, and to compare the amount that's in bread to the amount in the yoga mat is beyond silly. So to actually be proud of every single ingredient that's there and be able to explain why it's there and know that it is not harmful, so that you can counter the adverse messages that you might get from a not well-informed blogger.
That's a great point. And you're bringing back food babe PTSD.
Yeah. Yep.
But that is such a good point because there is this general mistrust of food manufacturing and big food brands. There's this just inherent distrust that consumers sometimes for no reason have. So that is a really good point to increase the transparency instead of just taking it out, which I think, God, that was probably 10 years ago at least, right? When all of that happened. And I think social media has evolved so quickly over those past 10 years. And I think baking companies have really learned a lot of lessons about proactive communication versus reactive. So you don't necessarily have to reformulate if you can justify your formulation to begin with.
And even now, the crazy ultra processed food that we talked about, the system arbitrarily picked foods that had any additive or more than 5 ingredients. So I think this is a perfect opportunity to talk about more than 5 ingredients might make it more nutritious because we're adding nutrients. More than 5 ingredients makes it more sustainable. More than 5 ingredients makes a banana walnut thing that might be absolutely delicious. And so to really be out front and say there's no science behind 5 ingredients, and this is why we're putting these things here, and it helps you.
Yeah, that's really such good advice. And I do have to say, I just kind of want to applaud the industry for a minute because I think we have come a long way. And there was this sentiment that baking companies needed to be behind the scenes and be under the radar. And especially like from a B2B standpoint, we don't ever want our competitors to know what we're doing. We don't want to reveal our formulas. Nobody needs to know what's going on behind the scenes, especially if they're supplying to a restaurant and things like that when they don't have a brand to promote. And I think the industry has come such a long way in transparency. We still have a long way to go, but I do think we're heading in that right direction. I think a lot of companies are catching on to the importance of sort of pulling back that proverbial curtain and showing there's nothing to be afraid of with these products. In fact, they're very good for you.
I think also, giving their food scientists and bakers like a voice, especially in the marketing and the social media, is a great idea, especially if they are working with food scientists who really understand how and why those ingredients are there, who can speak to them. I think that could be very helpful in educating consumers.
Right. And speaking of education, something else that I've seen the Grain Foods Foundation do really well is address the industry's workforce because they work in the industry, but they're also consumers. And when they're just going to work every day, sometimes they have this separation between what they're doing in a manufacturing facility or what they're making and what they're eating at home. I participated in the webinar that you two presented to Lalaman's workforce. And I was so impressed with some of the comments that were coming in on the chat. Like people who work in this industry were like, wow, I didn't think about this way. This is really interesting. You're opening my eyes. How do you think internal communication is helping the industry communicate to their end consumers? Why is it important?
I mean, I think these internal education initiatives are so important because by educating their employees, about the science and nutrition related to their products, they're really empowering their workforce to be more knowledgeable and engaged. And I think this not only enhances the quality of the products that they work on and sell, but also fosters a deeper understanding of consumer needs and health trends. So I believe employees who are well informed about the health aspects and also the culinary versatility of their products can then better advocate for them and provide valuable insights that can continue to drive that innovation and improvement.
In addition, I think you can make the employee feel proud, defend their product, and be proud they're doing it.
Right. And then also when you think about the shortage in the workforce, I think that it does also create this sense of pride in their jobs and what they're doing. And it creates this connection to their employer so that they are outwardly touting the benefits of the product that they make, but then they feel very connected to that product and they feel proud to get up every morning and go to work. And that's really helping just build up the workforce and build that loyalty in the workforce that we need so much right now.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm going to close with another sort of ethereal question. I love to just sort of sit back and dream with you two. With all of this conversation around sandwiches and these collective efforts and looking at it from all these different perspectives, do you think it's possible for these collective efforts to come together and turn the tide on how people view bread?
Possibly. I think we really need to get over this low carb trend first. But no, I think it's definitely possible. I think again, it's really just working on that innovation piece, but really just the consumer education and marketing. I think they could really change perspectives. And I think there are a few bread companies who are really working on that and doing a great job of it. So I do think it's possible.
My ace in the hole is a study that came out, published in Lancet, which is the equivalent of the Journal of the American Medical Association in Britain. It's a review of prospective studies of hundreds of thousands of people. And those people who ate a diet with 50 to 52% of their calories coming from carbohydrate, including bread, lived 4 years longer than if you ate keto or less carbohydrate, such as the low carb diet. Living longer should mean a lot to a lot of people. And so I think that's really compelling data. And if we can only get that information out, that might help turn the tide.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, let's be honest, this episode is about sandwiches, and there's just not as much joy to be had on a sandwich that has a piece of lettuce rather than 2 slices of bread.
Agreed.
All right, ladies. Well, that wraps up our Joey Tribbiani episode around sandwiches and how bread makers can use sandwich innovation to bust myths with consumers. And next week will be our last episode, and we are going to talk about a very important topic, and that is women's health. I don't think that a lot of consumers understand such a vital role that grain foods can play in women's health. So I'm very excited to dive into that topic with you next week. But for now, I just want to say thank you for your time and your insight and for yet another great conversation.
Thanks, Joanie.
Thank you for listening to Troubleshooting Innovation. And a special thanks to our sponsor, Lallemand Baking. Delivering solutions to bakers across the globe, Lallemand Baking is raising baking standards.